Hello, everybody. It's Larry Johnson, your host for Eight Principles Voices. And I'm delighted to have with me as a guest today Matthew Fretwell. And he's a pretty cool guy, as well as being an interesting guy. And he has a day job, obviously, for World Vision, and he's the director of spiritual formation. I hope I got that right. And of course, you just wonder, what does the director of spiritual formation do for a world relief organization? Well, we're going to find out about that. But I also want to find out a little bit more about his background. You might guess that he's a military dude, has a friend, has a family that's been in it for generations. And then I want to get at the core of why he does what he does. You know what we talk about there. So, welcome, Matthew.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Larry. Yeah,
All right.
yeah, I should correct. It's World Relief, which you did say the second time. Just want to make sure that World Vision is a lot bigger than World Relief. And I know
Okay.
the spiritual director over there too, and they do wonderful work.
Okay, well, I stand corrected. World Relief. Thank you. It's a senior moment here. So now that you've talked about it, what specifically does World Relief do that might be different from World Vision?
Yeah, if we're just going to unpack the our mission statement, we boldly engage the world's greatest crisis by partnering with the church. Sounds sort of packed, but if we unpack it a bit, there's 120 million displaced people around the world, and so we try to partner with the church globally to alleviate a lot of those issues that are surrounded with it, whether it be chaos, catastrophe, or conflict.
Okay. All right. So you're focused then on catastrophic events of one kind or the other, and you intervene as a part of the church.
You sort of. I mean, like we did that with Myanmar, but for the most part, Sudan, which is some of the greatest crisis currently on the planet with displaced people, whether it be internally displaced or externally displaced. I think there's close to 8.9 million people just in that country alone that have had to displace. And so we'll set up uh, um, sort of areas where we can help with either alleviating, like I said, some of those issues that come along with that, whether it be just for food or whether it be a shelter in camps or whether it be even in certain areas where it's vocational training, where we're helping them to sort of break the chains of poverty. Maybe it's beekeeping or something along those lines, where we can really help some things systemically.
Well, there's no doubt that Sudan has been a mess for a long time, a very violent place. I can't imagine. Now, is Sudan on the current list of no traveled countries? I know that the president just announced some yesterday.
They are. Yeah, that's a touchy subject for me because I see the world through the lens of scripture. I try to, and of course, I believe that our greatest mission is for those who are marginalized, outcast, and hurting those who are lost and or don't know Jesus unchurched, so to speak. And if we're just gonna shut the door, I think God has something to do sovereignly with moving people around the world,
Hmm.
and it all depends on your missional view, I would guess. But yes, they are one of the 12 to 19. There's 12 succinct countries, but there's 19 overall countries that have limited. Seven additional have limited, like Turkmenistan and several others.
Okay. Of course, I don't think you'd want a trip to Tehran anytime soon.
No, yeah, World Relief doesn't, even though my position, I have in residency tagged to my title, which means that I'm spiritual formation director in residency, which relates to me going to all of those offices globally. Obviously, I can't travel to some of them, but I'm not opposed to that. It's 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 kind of laughable for me sometimes when I go to certain countries and I'm showing my passport or visas and they're looking at it and they think, sure, you really work for an NGO. They don't seem to believe me, but I do get a lot of looks. Sometimes they'll leave with my paperwork and then come back with it. But truly, it's I've been on mission in other countries like in Western Africa or other places and for me it's all just about like the Apostle Paul. God's going to protect whether you go. And if he doesn't, he doesn't, but he's still with you, regardless of how that works. So if I had the opportunity to go to Tehran, I would.
Okay. All right. Uh, yes, I can imagine getting those reactions. Oh, no. No, this is the enforcer. That should say CIA. And so, why is he here? What's going on here? Um,
Yeah.
so, tell me, you've been involved in ministry of one kind or the other for a very long time. Um, I'll be very honest, you don't fit the profile of a typical, what I would call, and I'm a follower of Jesus, so I can say this, a compassionate Christian. They tend to be, they look different, they tend to behave differently. I'm being stereotypical here, but there's a reason for stereotypes. They're usually true. There's some true of them. So tell me, you look different and you act different. So tell me how it all came about, Matthew.
Yeah, well, I would definitely say that there was a major change. However, I mean, if I go all the way back, I mean, honestly, I I would say this that I accepted Jesus at age 11, but I didn't submit to Jesus until about age 30, which is just there's a huge difference.
I want
So
to
yeah,
I want to
go ahead.
pause a minute because there's a
Yeah.
big yes. We're welcome to accept Jesus, and the acceptance of Jesus is fairly a low risk thing, usually a pretty low risk thing, at least in this country. And so then that surrendering,
Mhm.
that act of obedience is a very, very different thing. And I can speak from personal experience. That was the case. I accepted Jesus when I was 9 or 10, and then I surrendered to him when I was more like 23. So,
Right.
yeah, I know the
Yeah.
difference.
Yeah, and I've said before, in all honesty, and I'm going to just personally, in all honesty, Jesus didn't really care that I accepted him or not. He was still King of Kings and Lord of Lords. It was whether or not that Matt Fretwell was going to submit and be obedient. And so I had an epiphany around that time. I was a restaurant owner, and I had realized since I was 8 that I had had a unique, and I just say unique because I think we all have a unique relationship with God, and I recalled that later on in life and just really grasped it, and I ran from that. I was the proverbial Jonah, which I think some of us are, even like Martin Luther said, the one who has been delivered from the hangman's noose understands grace a whole lot more. And that was me. And so when grace is extended or unmerited favor, I couldn't do anything but accept and gravitate toward that love and then say, well, Lord, help me to love others as you've loved me, because that's not where I gravitate to,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so the more I think one prays over that and truly prays for that, that's where the Spirit of God starts to work and just transform the heart and mind. Now, I'm not going to say that even though I'm a very compassionate person and I would give my life, um, when it comes to family, if you harm one of my daughters or family, you might be flirting on that line, let's just say.
Let's say on the wrong end of a
Yeah,
shotgun.
yeah. I do know some people. Yeah. Yeah.
How many children do you have, Matthew?
I have 3 daughters, all daughters, yeah. And so
Mm-hmm.
as the doctor said, some guys get the football team and some have the cheerleading squad. You have the cheerleading squad.
Okay. All right. Well, I have 3 daughters as well, but mine are a little older than yours, I'm sure. But yeah. Hmm. Um, so then you had this epiphany. You were running a restaurant.
Yeah.
So then you did the what next?
I don't know if it was exactly what next. I think I understood of what I was supposed to do. And I'll say this, that I had a love and passion for food. Food was easy. I mean, so much so I was on the Food Network, on multiple television shows. I'd won awards. I mean, I was never invited to James Beard House, but I mean, in my own set of goals and my own objectives, I had achieved everything that I wanted to, being a restaurateur and an operator and executive chef. And so I found myself sort of at the pinnacle of where I wanted to be. And I just remember kind of looking out of that proverbial mountain, thinking, is this all this is? And I lost the love for it. And I think it wasn't so much, that's how I would have described it back then. Now, looking back, I can see that it was just God's hand reinstilling or reinvigorating, rejuvenating what was already there, but just needed to really be stirred up. And that was a love for a creator that had always known me, had always walked with me, even through my dark and dumb years. He was always there. There are some times where I didn't see it. I didn't see it till years later, and I think that's. I think you almost have to be about 40 before you can really look back and or even see areas of expertise or giftedness, and because I think you have to go through a certain amount of experience
Mm-hmm.
before you
Mm-hmm.
start to see that. So for me, that was it. Looking back, I wouldn't say it was what's next. I would say, okay, I need to do what I was supposed to do in the beginning. But God was still glorified in me being a chef. He's used that years later, all of those gifts and talents in different ways. But yeah, it was more about how do I glorify God with the things that I have now for the future.
You raised a couple of issues. First of all, Steve Jobs said you can never connect the dots going forward, only looking back. And that's
Mhm.
exactly what you said. And then the whole idea that no experience is wasted.
That's right.
Nothing is, um, God runs a very tight economy. He doesn't have you do wasteful things. He uses everything that comprises you, and that every experience, everything you have. So you're not really making mistakes. You're
Right.
making things that add to what God is planning for you in the future. And I can speak to that as well. I mean, what I do now is so far afield from what I studied for. It's incredible. However, all of those experiences have come to have some value in what I do now. And you're seeing it for yourself. Absolutely. So there's something I want to talk about, and that is you had a talk recently, or it's an article about relational wealth. All
Right.
right. And one of the things that we do here at the Eight Principles is talk about relationships between investors and those organizations in which they invest. Notice I didn't use the D word. Okay. I'm very adamant about that because they are investing in an organization, they're investing in a vision, and or they're investing through an organization, investing in a
Right.
vision, and then they're looking to realize something deep within themselves. And so, can you talk, give us a little taste of your take on relational wealth? I want to hear this.
Yeah, well, I think we relate to poverty as something that's financial, but the aspect of wealth and poverty are these sort of bipolar opposites. But in reality, we don't measure things the way that we see that Jesus measures things, or the way that God does. If we were all created for relationship, right? Be
Mm-hmm.
fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. That's the missional mandate of God in the beginning. And so we understand that we're all made for a relationship. However, some are really good at it and in building relationships. And I'll say this, some cultures are a lot better at it than Western cultures. And I don't want to go too anthropological or
Well,
sociological,
I can
but it's
speak to
true.
that. Yeah, I can
Yeah,
speak to that. I did business in India for a few years, and I learned all about business etiquette in India, what's important to them, and they want to get to know you before they do business with you.
right.
I was invited into executives' homes for a meal before we discussed business. That
Yeah.
was a predecessor of that, and so I can see that.
So that works. along the same lines, whether we're talking business or nonprofit or religious, it doesn't really matter. In the grand scheme of trying to build relationships, whether you're trying to do it for evangelistic purposes or for financial purposes or for volunteer purposes, the reality is a lot of Americans are living in relational poverty because we're isolationists. We don't personally. It's always about liberating self and then trying
Hmm.
to find the greatest success for me. And it's never really about us or team. And that's why I think part of the dilemma with the church is that we Westerners don't view church as communal. They view it as something that is personal. So there's relational wealth where you can have support from family and community and others and friendships, or you can be in this relational poverty. So Americans probably wouldn't like the fact of me saying a lot of them are in relational poverty because they don't like the word poverty. But it's true, like, as you said, like when you go to other countries, and especially in somewhere where in Japan, where part of their religion is a way of life that relates to their parents and grandparents and great grandparents in sort of eternal life. So, how do you break through into that? And sometimes missionaries can take decades, and we've seen this historically, but I don't think there's anything erroneous with it. I think we just have to come with our mindset of understanding that they have a wealth of relationship. What can we learn from that, and
Hmm.
how do we apply it to our own lives instead of, and you'd probably agree with this, being financial, having a financial background in that area, that sometimes it's about, for Americans or Westerners, how do I seal the deal instead of how do I build a relationship and not worry about the deal? And those are two hard things to balance for us, right?
Well, they are a couple of things, couple comments I want to make about that. First of all, the American idea of rugged individualism, do it myself, the Marlboro man, you get it, okay?
I do.
And then also, I think a lot of our, well, and the idea of a personal relationship with Jesus as opposed to a corporate relationship, that's a very common term.
It
Um,
is.
and then I think a lot of our evangelical brethren don't appreciate the fact that, in the two views of the world, the Occident and the Orient, the two great epistemologies, Christianity sets astride those two and really came out of the Near Oriental world, meaning they think differently. They think not linearly, but in a circular fashion. And the Jewish community is more oriental toward that than they are occidental, and that's we don't under. And of course, there was, as you know, ancient Christian communities in the Indian subcontinent and in other places like that that people don't think of today. One thing I wanted to mention to you: when I was in India, um, everybody's got a religion, Matthew. Everybody's got a religion. Okay. You're expected to have one. Okay.
Hmm.
If you don't, you're a real oddball. What is your problem? All right. And most of the gentlemen I did business with were all Hindus. Well, they respected the fact that I was a Christian.
Hmm.
They sent me Easter and Christmas cards. All right. And they had their faith. I had my faith. That was the way it's done there. Unlike in this country, where there's so much secularism, an Indian would go, I don't know, I don't get this. What do you mean? What do you mean you don't have a religion? You don't have a God? How can you live without that? So, and that's definitely that sets the stride, that Occidental Oriental kind of stride as well. We think in terms of, as you said, let's get the deal done. Let's get the deal
Right.
done. Um,
Yeah.
so then you went from the restaurant business, and then you migrated to now, as I said, World Relief. I got it right.
Yeah.
So what was in between those two things?
Well, quite a bit, I guess. That was sort of the segue into how I got here. But I guess as an entrepreneur, and that's sort of what I was for years, just having that entrepreneurial spirit. And I then gravitated towards church planting. And I can see why. It was starting something new that isn't there. It's sort of like the culinary arts field. It's taking all of these things and bringing them together and producing this masterpiece. And it
Wow. Now
sort of,
you wrote a book about that, didn't you?
I did, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And so but I just believe that after a while, I found out that what I was really passionate about wasn't planting churches. It was about disciple making. And what I mean by that is, I say in one of my books, and several times I've said that I believe that Jesus didn't make disciples, he made disciple makers, because that's what he said. I'm going to make you fishers of men. And sometimes we use the word disciple or discipleship, and it has like this connotation of a beginning and ending, right? It's like, oh, it's something that I can complete instead of who I am, my identity, and something that I continue to do, And so for me, church planning was just this art of the relationship. And I would say that discipleship begins not at conversion, but at relationship. And so the moment that I meet someone, I'm working like discipling with them. For instance, I had these several guys at this gym that I was working out at, and one day they came up to me and they just
You
said,
work
"Hey,"
out at a gym? I would
right?
have never thought that,
Shocking,
Matthew.
right?
You
So
know?
they said to me, and this was actually when I was planting the second church when I got into this area, and so it's kind of relevant. And they came up to me and said, "Hey, we noticed that there's this one woman who always tries to get attention, but you don't look at her way." And I said, "No, I keep my head down." And I said, "Well, first of all, guys," I said, let's not be confused with really what she's looking for and what you think that you're going to get with this." I said, but here's the thing. You didn't realize, and I didn't realize that neither one of us are really sort of paying attention to each other. What I mean by that is, for the last several years, I've been discipling you with my way of life, and you see how I conduct my life. And so things have changed. And within that, you see that. So for me, it's about the relationship. And now I'm, good friends with several of them. And it's just an investment in life with others that's intentional. And so I gravitated toward that. And when my wife and I planted our second church and came into the area, Regent University, there was a professor there who reached out to me. He heard me on a podcast and he said, "Hey, I heard you're in the area." And I said, "I am. We just moved." And he said, "Well, I'd like for you to, you know, he said, send me your resume and I want to look at it and then I want you to come up and have lunch with me." And I said, "Okay." So I meet him at the university, and as he's greeting me, he said, "I want to introduce you to the associate dean." And I said, "Certainly, I'd love to meet him." And I walked in his office and he said, "Congratulations. I can't wait to have you teaching with us." And I thought,
This is
"Ah,
you went from A to Z without
yeah."
any stops in between.
And so this is what happens to church planners. This is like the God thing, these God moments that occur. And so I just said, absolutely, because church planners don't have any money. We need like five different vocations. And so I started out as an adjunct professor working at Regent University. And then they had asked me a few years after that they wanted to have a church planning degree and said, "Would you help us write the MA in church planning?" And I said, "I would love to." I had already worked with several denominations in writing their curriculums, and it's just something I'm passionate about. But once again, it's really about relationship. Like you said, it's about, we confuse disciple making with so much that we these terms that we utilize, we um, make it so much more difficult than it is. It's really very simple when it comes down to it. It's, are you invested in loving people or not? And if you are, it takes this intentionality of walking with them And that's through some hurts, sufferings, pains, joys, rejoicing, whatever those things may look like. And so from that point, I stayed, and I still do teach. I teach the church planting courses that I help create over there. And, but then World Relief, I believe what had occurred was at some point, I may have applied for a position with World Relief, but never heard from them for like a
Mm.
year. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, out of the blue, I mean, completely not on my radar. And I received an email asking if I'd be interested in this position that they never had before. They never had a director of spiritual formation. And so there was a lot that entailed within that, knowing that the position was going to kind of be malleable. It was going to go, it wasn't really solidified. It was going to, the person had to grow with the position and the
Ah,
position
your
may look different.
entrepreneurial spirit. Your
Yeah.
entrepreneur. There we go.
And
There we
so it was
go.
just, yeah,
Hmm.
it was something
Hmm.
that number one, I love challenge. If I'm not challenged personally, then I mean, I sort of stagnate and look around, right? I have to be challenged, and that's just how I've always kind of been.
That's
And
something else I
that
want to go
relates over
back
there.
to, and
Yeah.
that is, you know, oftentimes, and this is in the American evangelical wing of the church, there is so much emphasis on conversion
Yeah.
and once and done kind of thing. Unless you're Armenian like me, you can fall into grace. You got to be careful. Um, and But then the whole idea of growth and discipling, which is an ongoing process. Um, I'm sure you're familiar with the series The Chosen, and I recently sort of got hooked on it. I was reluctant for a long time because I do not like propaganda. And so much of what Christian media turns out to be is propaganda. And I think that doesn't do justice to it, quite frankly. You don't need to sort of manipulate the story to get a certain end. And
Right.
so, and when I was watching that, I mean, it really came across to me, these men, traipsed around the Middle East with him, and they kind of were learning as they went. They were kind of like, oh, I thought I understood. No, it's this. No, it's this. It's an unfolding process. That's really what I saw. And I'm a student of the scripture, I have a divinity degree, all that good stuff. But to see it, oh, so this is what was going on there. It's sort
Right.
of a gradual unfolding. And that's what you're telling me, and
Right.
growing. And
Well,
you enjoy doing that.
isn't this what Jesus said to Peter? And I think this is sort of the epitome of my walk, right? Where Jesus is washing their feet and he comes to Peter and Peter says, "Not so, Lord." And he says, "Well, if I don't wash your feet, then you have no part in me." And he says, "Okay, well, my head too." And he says, "What I'm doing now, you will not understand, but you will later." And when I read that verse, I'm like, aha,
Mm-hmm.
because that's sort of my relationship with the Lord. The things he's doing right now, I am clueless. But then later I look back and say, aha, I get it. Okay, so this is about a trust issue.
Mm-hmm.
This is about following, not sort of blindly, following with a trust and faith that is a tangible and visible, right? Hebrews 11:1. It's a faith and a hope that we can grasp onto. It's not blind faith. It's a committed and active faith. And as you said, we continue to grow and you build on those. It's like building blocks, right? You keep moving up. Maybe sometimes you go a little, down and up as some of those memes show, like, how we get to where we are. But the reality is it's all relational and we were designed for relationships. So that's horizontal and vertical. It's
Mm-hmm.
both and not either or. And I think sometimes, as or maybe our grandmothers had said to us, you can be so heavenly minded that you're no earthly good.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
How do
yes.
we balance that? And it's all about that healthy balance, right?
It is. So you've gotten the inquiry from World Relief, and they're interested. They've put their bait into the water. Um, and then you, I guess, presume said, "Well, I'm interested," and you went for an interview. Then what?
I did. What I learned later, I learned later that the CPO was my direct line. So basically, I was working with the CEO, the CPO, and in trying to develop this within the first year, which we had to be really sort of keen and aware and communicative and be able to listen. When I say communicate, I mean more listening than speaking. Because what we didn't want to do was for me to come into a position that was mandating things. That's not what it was about. It was about complementing, walking alongside, almost like the Parakletos, the spirit as, and I'm not the spirit, but walking alongside
I get it. I get it.
someone, yeah. And I came and I was given this insight later that there were 300 other individuals that they had interviewed for this position. And I just thought
300 who
that
had
was
been
a God.
interviewed.
That was just a God. Well, I don't know about they interviewed, but 300 people at least applied, from what
That
I
were in the
understand.
pool. That were in
Yeah,
the pool.
and
Yeah.
that's just that's a God thing. And when you receive that, uh, it's a lot more humbling for me. And I just, who am I, oh God? And so I put my heart and soul into what I do. What I love about my position is we try to really look at metrics within it, which is very difficult because when you're talking about spiritual formation, how do you measure? How can you measure or quantify whether someone is growing in their faith or not? And then with different denominations, I will have people that say to me, I really applaud you because I'm Catholic or because I'm Protestant or because I'm non-denominational, that you really keep things centered. And I just say, it's all about the gospel. If you just keep the gospel and focus there, you're not going to have problems if you don't go into the tertiary things that
Mm,
we like to argue about because we have common ground.
yes.
And let's keep the common ground, and move forward in our mission.
Um, I think I'm getting an inkling as to what you do. Now, you do this in the field as well as in the central office.
I do. Yeah. So we have what we call home office. Then there's international programs and US programs. And
Okay.
there's leadership in all of that. And so my position would be to cultivate spiritual rhythms across all of those, whether it be being physically in the office with those leaders to work with them or people in the field. Sometimes it's such a blessing to be in the field and working with even volunteers, say perhaps like I have before, going to an airport and welcoming someone, or going into another country and working with church leaders that are there and hearing about the church that is global and working so dynamically. Whatever it may be, for me, it's all about seeing people experience a greater relationship with the Lord that is impactful for them, not just in what they do, a work faith intersection, which is a lot of what I do, but also in how that faith impacts their community. And once again, it's communal relational wealth. Is that what we're building, or is it more agenda? Like, I think you may agree, of a lot of times we'll talk about evangelism and then discipleship as if they're divorced,
Hmm.
right? And I don't see it as divorced. And also, I don't think that we need to sort of take in the proselytizing aspect. I think, and I'm not going to say like, by the way, there's a quote that says Saint Francis of Assisi once said something along the lines of, that sometimes you use words, which is false. Saint Francis of Assisi never said anything like that. You can't find it. We looked for it in research in my doctoral work. You can't find it. But I get the gist of that. Sometimes, and I would say almost all times, you have to use words. So for me, maybe I'm not proselytizing, but if someone asks me to pray for them, I'm allowed to pray for them. I can in
Hmm.
Jesus' name, right? I mean, and that's part of who I am. And this organization promotes that work faith balance of Christian faith. We have Christian principles and values that we highly adhere to. We're going to acknowledge that that's who we are. But we're also going to love anybody of any faith because they're created in the image of God. And so, with that, they have value and integrity, intellect, reason, and we acknowledge all of those things. And so, we think that's imperative and essential to our mission because we don't see that Jesus really made any distinctions, right? With the Samaritan woman, whether it be the centurion, whether it be
Oh,
the
he went
demoniac.
out of his way
He
to
did. Yeah,
demonstrate that he was not drawing distinctions,
right.
much to the consternation of his followers sometimes. Do you know what you're getting yourself into, Lord? Rabbi, we don't get this. And there's a scene in The Chosen, actually, where the calling of Matthew, he's in his little tax collector box, and Jesus has had a couple of minor encounters with the man. And so he walks by and he says, Matthew, follow me. And Matthew says, me? And Jesus says, yes. Well, Simon Peter, is standing right next to him. And he says to Jesus, do you know what you're doing here? I mean, this is different. And Jesus' response was, Simon, get used to different. In other
Right.
words, he was breaking down barriers everywhere he went. Um, and so that's so world relief then is ardently non-denominational, then both all areas of the church, be they Catholic, Protestant, they're all there. And this is fascinating. This is an organization I didn't know much about, actually, Matthew.
I
um,
think, and this fits, Larry, this fits really well with me. So, we didn't even, if we went back to, how I was brought up. So I was raised Episcopalian. I switched over to Methodist. I was dunked Pentecostal. I went to a Southern Baptist seminary, two of them, and was married Presbyterian. So I'm a theological mutt, even though I
and if
sort
I
of,
understand correctly, you have a kneeling rail in your office, correct?
I do. Yeah.
Okay.
And
All right.
so, the Book of Common Prayer is there
Oh,
for me, which
wonderful, wonderful. Warms my heart, Matthew.
so Baptists look at like, what am I? But you see, what that did is I was also a hospice chaplain when I planted my first church. I was bivocational as a hospice chaplain. I never thought it was going to be as rewarding as it was. And being able to understand people's theology instead of trying to convert them to a specific one, serving them within their Christian denomination. And I was
Mm-hmm.
able to do that because I would see immediately a part of maybe they would say something. And of course, I do have a master's in theology, but I experienced these different denominations. So I
You know,
understand them.
being a hospice chaplain, the sound of it is a pretty depressing possibility. I mean, when you think of it, and you could have approached it that way, but you didn't, obviously.
Oh, I have stories that would be another podcast, but when you talk about
Maybe we'll do that.
right
All right.
death experiences and things like that that's something that is solidified in that position because it's speaking of something that seems so final, but in the experiences that you have, you realize it's not final.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that's neither here nor there
That's
in
it.
this one. But
Okay. All right. Well, this is yeah. I think we will do another one of these. Yeah. So okay, you're now a master of the spiritual formation at World Relief. I got that right. I'm going to keep repeating myself to that. And how long have you been doing that now?
going on 3 years now. Yes.
Okay.
So yeah. And of course I've seen the differences, and differences in administrations and so how we serve in one and how we serve in another. For me, I'm just going to serve. Like I
Mm-hmm.
try not to get hung up in the political side of either aisle, and I find myself as an American very critical of both. I'm sort of libertarian, so I really don't have a place to lay my head
You'd
anyway.
enjoy living in Idaho, Matthew.
Yeah,
Idaho's
yeah.
very, very libertarian.
So,
And,
yeah,
libertarians sometimes, there are strange bedfellows between libertarians and conservatives. People
yeah,
assume a libertarian is conservative, not necessarily. It's government out of our face. Let us
right.
do our own thing,
Yeah,
and I found that to be pretty much here. Well, depending on where you are in the state, the LDS have a sizable presence in this valley, the Treasure Valley, which is Boise and all the metro area here. It's about 15 to 20%, but you get further east, and it can be almost 50%. But it's pretty much well, we just do our own thing out here, and yeah, you do your thing, I do my thing. We're okay. We're cool. Now, there are other things that go with that, a love of guns and gun related things and this kind of thing. Very, very, but I have found that people are very accepting here for the most part. And they're willing to sort of go, okay, you do your thing, I'll do my thing. And so another libertarian, Matthew. Okay, there you
yeah.
go.
It sort of fits with the Gen X. You have boomers and Gen Z fighting, and Gen X sort of in the middle, like, hey, I
The
don't belong
silent generation, the
here.
the
Yeah.
the latchkey kids, as they say. Anyway, so what we could go on forever, and I think I probably will want to do another one of these. But what would you like to add today? What is it that I've not mentioned or that is just really on your heart to share?
Yeah, I would say probably just the sharing of what makes me tick is really what I'm passionate about is building relationships and seeing organizations just make an impact.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm the type of person where I don't, even though I've completed a doctoral dissertation and I love research, I honestly do. I love research, but even more so, I love the implementation of research. And so I'm the type of individual that I create a lot of content. I mean, a lot of content.
Oh, I
But
noticed.
but with but with that comes practicums or things that have to be lived out in a way that make those that content practical. And so I'm always thinking while I'm developing it, how does this relate locally? How does this relate individually or communally in the things that I'm doing? And I wish that the writers of more content would be more practical or maybe um, have more experience in the things that they're writing. There's a lot of people who are writing things that have never experienced it or walked through it. One of
Mm-hmm.
the joys that I had was going because I'm also on the Lausanne, if you're not familiar with Lausanne, which
I
started in the
am.
70s. So I went to the last Congress in South Korea, and I'm on the Lausanne Issue Church Planning Network, one of the group catalysts there. And so our job is really, finding regional other catalysts and then helping them to create these movements globally. And with that, I've seen some of the greatest joy is that in the majority world, which we may call the global south, I'm just seeing this explosive um, movement of people that are coming to Christ in exponential numbers. And within that, leaders that are going to take the church to the next age, the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of the minds that I really gravitate toward reading are not so much the Western, but more of the majority world. And I just find great joy in that, not because I want to see, the old white guy not get a position. but I feel like sometimes I'll say, I feel like my voice has been heard on that, and I want to hear or see through different eyes. I want
Hmm.
the different perspective. It's not that I want to close one side out because we all have great things to add and um, our input into that. But I think it's important that we're hearing what's happening because there's a lot of voices that are saying, "Oh, the church is dead, church is dying, church is declining." Well, that may be so in the Western world, but in the
Well, in
majority
Central
world,
Europe and East Western Europe,
yeah,
it's kind of dying on the vine. Except I guess Poland's experiencing a resurgence. Um, but yeah, I mean, uh, but now, well, and we know that the majority of the growth is in the southern hemisphere, and primarily through the Roman Catholic Church. It's where a lot of it is. Um, Not all of it, but certainly a good chunk of it's coming from them. But yeah, I get that.
yeah.
I like your
Pentecostal. The Pentecostal
Pentecostal.
movement. Yeah, the Pentecostal movement is really large. Assemblies of God is one of the fastest growing at the current moment. But regardless of that, I think what we're seeing is we're finally acknowledging that the church isn't just this west to the rest. It's about this
West to the
global.
rest. I love
Yeah,
that.
right.
West to the rest.
We've looked like that for years in missions, and we've thought that we, as in the Western world,
The big
especially
way.
America,
Yeah, the big way.
yeah, that we're gonna save, we're gonna save people. But I think what we forget is right now, more missionaries come to the United States than any other country in the world. We are the mission field. And so it's important for us when we look at the diaspora, all these other nations that I believe God is just sending here, and then they go back, but they're even coming as believers. And then I think the numbers are over 50%. I don't know the exact percentage, and I don't want to say one because I know people will say most percentages are right off the top of your head. So since I don't know that one right off the top of my head, I'm not going to say it, but I do believe it's over 50% of immigrants that come to the United States already have a faith in Christ. I know it's greater than 50%, and that's good. That means that God is at work when we're talking about movement of people, right? Daniel
Mm.
12. Daniel, seal up the book until the end, and he says, when knowledge increases and people move to and fro. And all I can say is we're at the moment where we're seeing 120 million plus uh, people displaced around the world. I'm not going to push that and say it's a God movement, but it very well could be a
Something's
God
happening.
movement.
Yeah.
Is it the last times? I said, we're in the last times the moment Jesus ascended. We've been in the last times since then.
Well,
So,
yeah, because he said that very soon. Now,
yeah,
as we know,
right.
soon is a relative term.
It is.
And if we're talking about the Almighty, who is not constrained by time, as we, um, then it takes on a whole different dimension. What does that really mean? It is. Matthew, I want to thank you for doing this today. We're going to do it again, I promise you. Um, Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Wow. I learned a lot. I'm sure the audience is going to learn a lot too, my viewers and my listeners. Uh, Thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you, Larry. I appreciate it. It was just a great conversation. And hopefully I look forward to doing this again with you.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, viewers, also and listeners, for joining us today. And we look forward to another episode soon.